Darren Ritson lives in North Tyneside, where he is a prolific author who has an interest in the paranormal for most of his life, following some strange experiences as a child. With a long and illustrious career in the research of paranormal activity, Darren is the author of 18 books spanning a vast variety of the paranormal. Darren is to the South Shields Poltergeist what Guy Lyon Playfair was for the Enfield Poltergeist. In this episode, I discuss in detail his painstaking investigation into one of the most talked about and shocking paranormal cases of the last 50 years. I would like to welcome to the show Darren Ritson.
Hello there. Hello.
How are
nice
you?
to be. Yeah, I'm all right. Thank you. Yeah.
Cool. That's brilliant. There is a slight delay from both of us. I'm sure lots of people who've been watching podcasts recently will notice that we do have technical issues, but we'll get through it the best we can. Darren, first of all, I really want to thank you so much genuinely for coming on and talking to me today.
No problem.
It's an extremely poignant subject we're going to talk about, because it's one that I think probably of all the paranormal experiences that people have, poltergeist is probably the most feared. So without further ado, let me just mention, first of all, the South Shields Poltergeist, written by your good self. I'll be honest with you, I've not actually read it yet because it's only just come through, but I am going to read it. Also, I think it'd make for an exciting podcast if I find out some of the information from you rather than knowing it beforehand. So, first of all, Darren, could you just please tell us a little bit about you and about your life before the South Shields Poltergeist? What was your fascination in the paranormal? How did you get to be where you are?
Well, that all began as a child growing up in the house I used to live in an area called St. Anthony's in the Newcastle area, in the Walker area of Newcastle upon Tyne. As a kid growing up, I was always fascinated with the idea of spooks and things like that. My dad used to tell us ghost stories when I was a kid, bedtime stories and things. You know, most normal kids get, fairy tales and things like that, but my dad used to tell me these ghost stories, which kept us firmly rooted to my bed, I have to say it. I don't, at the time, I wasn't sure if it was a ploy to keep us in bed, if you know what I mean. You know, when you put kids to bed, sometimes they get up and they play and they run around. I had a brother in the other room. But anyway, he used to tell us these stories about these things that used to happen in the house and stuff. And I was terrified witless, but I thought it was great at the time. But it was only years later I'd talk to my dad and I'd ask him about the ghost stories he was telling us, because they're always concerned either my room or the house or the railway line out back of the house. And I used to say, can you remember them ghost stories you told us as a kid? And he said, yeah. And he goes, was there any truth in them, or were you just trying to scare us witless? And he went, oh no, son, there were true ghost stories. There was a lad that lived in your house, and there was a lad that died on the railway line behind. And I heard footsteps. He used to tell us about the footsteps he would hear pattering around upstairs, and then he'd come upstairs and yell, "Get to sleep, get into bed, the pair of yous," and would be fast asleep in our beds. But there was just things like that. I mean, I went to France in 1986 and I experienced this bedside cabinet rocking from side to side. We'd put it in the middle of the room because we'd spilled some orange juice on the floor, and we weren't allowed to take drinks into this dormitory where we stayed, and it was in Dieppe in France. So we covered it up with a heavy bedside cabinet, not thinking for 1 minute if the teacher had come in, he would have said, "What's that doing in the middle of the room?"
In the middle of the room, yeah.
Yeah, we could have just mopped it up, but we were kids. We just thought, well, let's cover the stain up. And later on through the night, I woke up to this slow knocking sound, and it was this cabinet rocking from side to side, coming up on its edge and balancing. And then as it was coming down, it was making a knock, and then it was doing the same thing back and forth, and it would have this slow knocking sound. So I kicked my legs over the side of the bed and rubbed my eyes and had a closer look, and it just took off. And I was absolutely petrified. I jumped up, put the light on, and there was about 5 or 6 other kids in the dorm with us, like on bunk beds and things scattered throughout. And they woke up and they were thinking, what on earth was that? By then I'd flicked the light on. I was in tears. and all my stuff, my keys, my French francs and stuff, they were just strewn all over the place. But I seen it rocking from side to side, and it was in the middle of the room, and it was that was terrified. So coming back from that, I started getting books and magazines, started reading about ghosts and psychic powers and UFOs and all that unexplained stuff, and I was gripped, frightened, but I was like, "It's got to be something going on here," you know. But there was that and a number of other spooky things I had, which more or less got me juices flowing, shall we say? And I was like, I need to get into this and start reading about it.
I had, it sounded like we had a very similar kind of upbringing then, because my father, who's still with us, he was always one for telling ghost stories, and I never knew whether they were real or not. I was exposed to the paranormal at a really young age. Mine was, I read a book, it was like an illustrated book, and it got Bally Rectory inside it. And I can remember reading the story of Bally Rectory, and I was fascinated with everything. And it's the same thing, you know. It's like it's equal amounts of fear and intrigue. It's kind of like it's like being on a ride at Alton Towers, where you feel on edge all the time. So I absolutely get what you mean about that kind of that need to find. Hence the podcast, you know, Undiscovered Planet. I just wanted to open my mind and my eyes to different people's perceptions of certain things that are paranormal. Everything from ghosts to Bigfoot to Pizzagate, whatever it is people want to come on and talk to me about. I've got somebody coming on next few weeks who's absolutely convinced that the Earth's flat and claims that they can prove it. So I'm just an open book, and I wanted to take stuff in. So talking of open books, were you already involved in paranormal investigation, obviously, before the South Shields Poltergeist? Had you ever experienced anything? How did that get set up?
I began in the early 90s, really. My first ever contact with a real paranormal investigator, shall we say, was with a guy called Malcolm Robinson from up in Scotland. Okay. I can't remember how I actually found out about him. I just remember getting his address, and I thought to myself, I want to take this a little bit further. Up until that point, I had these questionnaires which I devised, and it was, if I ever heard anybody talking about a ghostly experience or something weird, I would ask them to fill in this form. And it was like a little questionnaire, and it was like, where did you see it? And, you know, like as much detail as possible. Yeah. And I used to collect all these forms. And I used to go around taking photographs of haunted places, hoping I'd catch a ghost. And I used to do this all on my own. Not as like there's many teams kicking about now, but like when I first started out, I was just like a little solo investigator, or a young lad with a passion, shall we say. And eventually I got this contact, and I thought, I'm going to take this a little bit further. So I'm going to write to this guy Malcolm, and I'm going to ask for advice, and I'm going to say, you know, like how, if I've investigated like a ghost sighting, how could I improve on it? What points could I, you know, that sort of thing. So I contacted this guy, and he said he started sending letters to me back in those. That was probably about early 1993, 1994. And it just went from there. He started to send us advice and tips and things, and he says, if you ever send us a report, we'll feature it in our Enigmas magazine. Which I did from time to time, you know, and then it just went from there. We got into the 2000s, and I was at work one day, and this guy come up to us, and he was like a new individual on my team at work, and I was, you know, what are you interested in? You know, trying to get to know the lad, make him feel at home at work. And he says, "Oh, I'm into ghosts. I like ghost books, and I read Peter Underwood books." And I was like, "Well, I've got all the Peter Underwood books, and I'm into ghosts." And he sort of kind of rekindled me passion, but it was always there. But I was back and forth doing different things at the time, and it got to a point where we were like sort of meeting up outside of work, and we were like talking ghosts and things like that. And all of us, one day there was an advertisement in the paper, and it was like this paranormal research team meeting up. and they're going to have an open day at a place called Newcastle Keep in Newcastle City Centre. And I thought, oh, we'll go along, we'll have a little look. And it just sort of snowballed again, and like everything come flooding back, and I had all my files and folders and things, and I started looking through them again. And it was mainly from about 2002, 2003, we started doing the overnight investigations. So it had been a couple of years, I suppose, but I guess I was relatively inexperienced, especially when it comes to big poltergeist cases, like the one that just fell out my feet, basically. So through that research society, there was a guy I met called Mike, and he was one of the founding members of this team. And as it happens, Mike, the first day I met him, he had just come back from doing a conference. I think it was the Lapis conference somewhere in the Northwest. And I got introduced to Mike, and he had told us Malcolm Robinson was there. And I was like, well, that's weird, because I used to write to Malcolm Robinson, and I've got all my stuff here with us and stuff like that. So I showed him and that. And it just went from there. And once the South Shields case come along, after I'd been investigating, it was just like, like the usual overnight investigators setting up tape recorders and going with your cameras and your notepads and pens and trying to see if anything would happen, see if you could observe anything. But when the South Shields case come along, I thought to myself, well, I'm going to need someone to come with us, at least for a bit of support. I don't want to go to this person's house on my own. So I asked Mike, and I thought, because Mike had been around the block quite a lot. He'd been around for about 20, 25 years doing research and talks and writing, and he had already wrote a couple of books himself. And I thought to myself, well, there's no other person I can think of who'd be better to maybe assist, because at that point we'd become like sort of firm friends by then, you see. So up until South Shields, I guess, yes, I was relatively inexperienced, but you don't get any experience in these things until you're like thrown in at the deep end with them. And now I've had experience of this poltergeist. If I would ever get another bigger one like this, I've got an idea of how I'd like to approach it. And there's things that we could have done first time around, which I would maybe do the second time around. So it's all a learning experience, I suppose, isn't it?
So how were you first approached? When did you first hear about the South Shields Poltergeist?
Well, again, I was at work. I was sitting at my desk at work, and my line manager, she had disappeared for her lunch. And when she come back, she tapped us on the shoulder and she went, my friend's daughter's got a ghost. And I looked and I thought, okay, whatever. Yeah, I've heard this a million times before, the amount of times you hear people's stories and things. And I turned around and I goes, oh, well, go and tell us about it then. And she started saying, well, she's got this friend, and she's been on her lunch, and she's saying a friend's got a daughter, and this has been happening and that's been happening. And I says, go a little bit more into detail in that. And she says, well, if you want, you can email her, you can and start finding out for yourself. So basically things had been going on in the house, like just little subtle things at first, like a door being left open when they were adamant that it was closed, and like maybe the tap was being left on. They started blaming each other, the couple at the home. They were like, have you left the tap on? And it was like, no, it wasn't me, it must have been you. And they said, no, it wasn't me, it must have been you. It was just minor things like that. And then after a while, it sort of progressed slowly but surely to where they started like scratching their heads, and they were thinking things like, well, starting to get a little bit iffy. They were starting to get a little bit nervous about it. And things were being moved around, and they were finding things like in the middle of the floor, things placed in the bath, stuff like that. So anyway, I was talking to my line manager, and she said, well, basically you can drop a mother a line you can drop a mother a line if you want. So I sent her an email, and I says, your friend Leslie's told us about this ghost. Would you like to tell us more about it? And for a few weeks or so, there was a couple of emails going backwards and forwards with information on. And eventually it got to the point where this lady who I was talking to said, look, you might as well just contact my daughter. She said you can contact her. So I did, basically. And then again, she went over some of the stuff that her mother had been telling us, and they were convinced that there was something going on in the house. And I was trying to ease their minds as well, if you know what I mean. I was trying to like calm them down, because there was a couple of times she was a little bit hyped up, if you know what I mean, a little bit scared. But basically, The years previously, I had done a lot of reading and a lot of research on poltergeists and what the theories and ideas are in relation to them. And so I had a bit of an idea of how I could try to reassure this girl. Right, so it was Maurice Gross who I saw on an interview, and he was basically explaining what he tried to do was to try and get these victims of the poltergeist to not be victims by encouraging them to become more active in the investigation. He was basically saying, if something happened, don't think of it in a dread sort of, oh no, here we go again. He said, get excited about it, note the experience down, make a note on what time it was, and and be grateful that you've got it. And he says, the more that you get into this, the more that you're excited about it, the more your stress levels will come down, and the likelihood is things won't happen as much. So with that in mind, this is what I said to Marianne. This was the lady in the house. Obviously, it's a pseudonym. We've named her Marianne in the book. So that's what I said to her. That's what I said to her on the phone. I said, just look, this is what I think it could be. From what you've said, this is what it sounds like. Obviously, I can't be 100% certain about that because I haven't been and experienced it, or I haven't came to the house. But from what you're saying, it sounds. It could be like a poltergeist. So this is what I would advise you to do if you feel you could. And she agreed to do that. And she started making notes and times, what happened, who was there, things like that. And she started making this little diary. So every now and again, for a number of weeks, she would phone up and I would phone her and I would ask her how things are going, and she's saying this is still happening, that's still happening, and things are still occurring. And every time I'd phoned up, I'd try to reassure her and say, look, these things are normally short-lived. The likelihood is, if it's been going on for a while now, it might be reaching its peak and then it'll peter out, perhaps, fingers crossed, hoping that it would. But it never did. And after a month or so, I got a phone call and it was like, look, you're really going to have to come over because this is getting ridiculous. This all sorts of weird things were happening. There was one incident involving a child's rocking horse, which they had, and every time they put it somewhere, like back in its place, they would come back and they would find it somewhere else in the house. It was always in a different place. It was just moving it around. And one day they came in and they went upstairs, and much to the horror, they actually found this thing hanging by the loft hatch from its reins, which absolutely terrified them. Yeah. So they brought it down, put it outside. They thought, that's it, it's going outside. We want this thing out the house completely. And so they put it outside, and next time it found its way back in the house. It was there back in its original place. I know it's like very classic horror movie stuff, but this is what was reported at the time. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, if this is true, this is too good to be true. We need to get in and have a look. But by then she'd asked me to come across anyway and have a look. And I says, right, we're definitely going to come over. So that's when I contacted Mike and I says, look, I've got this potential poltergeist case. It could be live. Would you be prepared to come over with us? Because I've been asked to go in. And he agreed, and it just went from there. And on that day, that first day we went in, that would have been of July 2006. That was the day that, I guess, changed my life completely when it comes to being on the fence in regards to poltergeist activity, because I was always open-minded to it, but I'd read about cases like Rosenheim and Enfield and also and some of the big, and I was thinking, is it stretching the boundaries of imagination here, or is it misattribution? And I thought, well, I'm open-minded to it, and I kept on thinking back to that incident in France, and I was thinking, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But then from that day forward, in July of 2006, it was like, wow, this is amazing. Because there was a fair bit of stuff happening on that first day. And then it just spiraled out of control, and it got worse and worse and worse as the months went by. So,
can you remember, you said that when you first went into the house in July 2006, that it changed your life. Can you remember the first thing that you experienced yourself with that you were there, you witnessed?
Yes. It was. It didn't happen for about 3 or 4 hours into our visit in the afternoon. A lot of the first part of the time we sat down. We had a glass of an ice cold water. It was a boiling hot summer's day. Back in that 2006. In fact, the whole country was baking in a heat wave. So when we got off had a cup of tea, even although tea is quite nice and refreshing, we opted for a nice glass of icy water, which was nice. And we spent a couple of hours just chatting to the family and getting to know them and trying to explain a few things and maybe just trying to put them at ease and trying to form a sort of rapport with them, and try to ensure them, like, if there was something odd going on, then we were going to investigate it and we were going to try and see it through with them. But it was later on in the afternoon we decided to go upstairs. All 4 of us. There was myself, Mike, and there was Morgan and Marianne. We trundled up upstairs after being told that a lot of the activity occurred in the youngsters' bedroom. So we went up there and we just sat vigil. Really, it wasn't like one of those nighttime vigils. It was, we just made ourselves comfortable and we were just talking in the room. And out of the blue, from nowhere came this. It was like it's hard to describe. You saw something just flew past with it, like maybe I can't remember how long we were in the room for before it happened. But what actually transpired was the young lad had it was like a toolkit, little plastic toolkit, with a hammer and screws and nuts and bolts, and it was all put away in the corner and stuff like that. And there was these little nuts and bolt things, little yellow things that were part of his kit, which he'd like make, put a table together with, and a bit like Meccano sort of type thing, the nuts and bolts that you get with Meccano, little plastic one. Basically, in a nutshell, pardon the pun, that it flew across the room. It so fast, and it bounced off the back wall, and it ricocheted off the wall, and it hit Marianne on a backside stroke hip, and she winced, she jumped, and we were like, it's hard to put into words, because as I'm trying to discuss this, I think back to these feelings, and I get the hairs on the back of me arms and my neck standing up, and it was just amazing. Anyway, this nut thing flew across the room and hit Marianne, and she winced and she jumped, and me and Mike looked at each other, and you could see the look of frightened terror on their face. And so something had been clearly thrown from one end of the room to the other. And as we were excitedly sort of discussing this thing, on the table across the other side of the room, there was a few little bits and bats. It was like a flat top table, and there was this like a toy goal post, which the youngster had obviously been used to play with, like with a football set or something. Yeah. And as we were talking about this nut being ricocheted around the room, this goal just slid across the bench, and then it fell off and it landed. There was a bin underneath, and it made a clatter in this bin. So then we were like, oh my God, there's something else has happened now. There was the nuts being flying around, and then this thing's kids' toys are starting to like slide off the bench. And we were getting quite excited about that. And obviously Mike and I, we were like thinking, oh wow, this is great. But Mark and Marianne were like terrified. So we actually had to stop and say to them, look, we do apologize for getting all excited and happy, but from our perspective, we're relatively convinced now that you're not pulling my leg, or you're not winding her up, you're not having a joke. We needed to see something in order for her to establish that something might be really going on. Now, all the time this was going on, we were like discussing and thinking to ourselves, well, I had my eyes on her hands, and Mike was he was watching Mark, and Mike was watching me, and I was watching, everybody was watching everybody, sort of thing. And we were like, there's a million things rushing around in my head, thinking to myself, well, what could have accounted for that? Could they have done it somehow? Is there any strings playing? We couldn't find anything to indicate any sort of trickery on that day. And it was just mind blowing. I know it's something as simple as like a nut flying across the room, but when you think back to the Enfield Poltergeist, when the first investigators went in, this was before Morris and before Morris and Guy had went in. There was newspaper photographers and reporters there, and they too. That's how it kind of started for them, which was like a weird coincidence, because there was little Lego bricks and they were being flung around, and they were so fast as well, whizzing past their heads. Yeah. And I think the photographer, Richard, I can't remember his name now. He was called Morris. Anyway, the photographer from the paper, he got hit in the head with this thing, and it was just like, it was absolutely fascinating. And then a way later, this ball appeared out of nowhere, and Mark and Marianne were sitting on the bed, and then this ball just sort of appeared and bounced off him and landed. He nearly jumped through the roof, to be honest. And we said, "What's up?" And he went, "This ball's just appeared." And to the best of our knowledge, there was nothing on the bed when they sat down, and the ball was quite a size, and that just appeared. And when we picked it up, it was actually quite hot, which was weird as well. So that first day, a number of things had occurred. So when me and Mike sort of left on the day, we were sitting on the bus heading back to Mike's, and we were like discussing it. We were like bewildered, open mouth, and was like, Gordon Bennett, yeah, this could be like a real poltergeist case in action. And from what they've been telling me, it sounds like to be the real deal. And we were quite excited about the prospect, but we did have to reiterate again to the family, say, look, we understand this might be hellish for you, but from our perspective, at least now we've got a good idea that there is actually something going on, and it's potentially worth following up.
So I mean, you're right. There's an awful lot of similarities by the sound of things with the South Shields and the Enfield Poltergeist. I think I remember reading about the Enfield Poltergeist that there was small objects at first, like you say, Lego bricks that were moved. I know there was talk also about items just appearing out of nowhere, falling from the coins falling from the ceiling. And
well, that's funny you should mention it. Yeah, that happened at South Shields later on in the investigation. There was showers of coins, and you see, I think back to this, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It's a classic case of somebody pinched me. Did this happen? Yeah. It's like, wow. I remember standing there on one occasion. In fact, the chairman of the Association of the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena. It's called ASAP. It was founded in 1981 or thereabouts. And the chairman of ASAP was a friend of mine. And I phoned him up, and him and his partner came up all the way from Swindon, and they experienced a lot of stuff in the house that afternoon. And one of them things was coins just materializing from nowhere and just hitting the wood floor, and they were making such a clatter. And that happened on a number of occasions with a number of other people there. The things were just dropping out of nowhere. Absolutely bewildering. So
you are right.
It does have a lot of similarities.
Yeah, well, massive similarities. And also, I think there was also talk of the temperature of objects were quite warm sometimes. I know that was mentioned at Enfield as well. One thing I wanted to ask you about is there was obviously Mark and Marianne, and there was a young boy that was there as well. How long had they been living in the property before these things started to happen?
Oh, that's a good question. They had been in there a number of years. I can't quite remember, to be honest, because it was like 15 years ago when we, you know. But I think they were definitely living there for a good while, a good number of years. They were actually in the process of buying the house as well, so they'd had a mortgage out on it. So, I mean, they were there to settle down and stay there, sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? But I think that they'd been in the house a good number of years with nothing actually happening up until the December of 2005. December 2005 was when things started to get a little bit odd. Yeah.
So you've been bought in. I agree, and I completely understand what you're saying as well about I know it's terrifying for people, but as an investigator myself for many years and going to many places, as an investigator, you hope and pray that you get the next Enfield, that you get the next South Shields. So I can understand probably deep down you must have been thinking this is terrible for the family, but it's brilliant for me because it validates a lot. I think there's still, thank God, a lot of investigators that don't just, we don't just believe what people tell us. So we want to see it with our own eyes. We want to have that experience. I do. I'm at my escape rooms now in Stoke-on-Trent. This has actually had a lot of activity. In fact, it's on. We're on TV tonight on Really Channel with some paranormal poltergeist activity that's happened within inside this building. But this is a far cry from places like South Shields and from the Enfield Poltergeist. It's that kind of. I would love to have been part of the investigation at the South Shields, because it's like an investigation. It only comes around once in a lifetime, doesn't it, for most people?
Yeah, it's what we're saying. What we're saying in the book. I used to say this even prior to the case. I would say, wouldn't it be great if we could get a big case? Like you say, the next Enfield, and it's quite spooky how it worked out because I wasn't actually looking for it. It just dropped into my lap. He said this lady come up to us at work and she said, "Oh, my friend's daughter's got a ghost." And I've told her, like, you're into the paranormal and you do these ghost hunts and you're quite interested. And I was thinking, like, well, I'm glad it came to me, to be honest. I'm glad that I got it. Not simply because I wanted the case. There was back in 2006, 2005, 2006, there was still, not as many teams as what there are kicking about now, but there was still a lot, compared to what there was 10 years previously in the 90s.
Yeah, definitely.
And the case could have landed in anybody's lap, to be honest. And without trying to sound too derogatory towards a lot of other people, there's a lot of hobbyists and there's a lot of thrill seekers out there, and there's a lot of people into it for the entertainment side. And if it had fell into one of their laps, it might have ended up going under the radar completely. Yeah. Or
no, I agree.
It might not have been.
I don't think it's what you're saying there, by the way, I think is what most serious investigators feel anyway. And it isn't. I don't think it's even derogatory towards the other groups or people that do that. I normally call it paranormal pantomime. You get some groups that there's all this hype and it's all about excitement, whereas you and I and other people know that sometimes you can investigate somewhere and you can get nothing all night. Yeah. You might get things that happen, but if you think really hard and you calm yourself down, you can explain virtually every thing that goes on. It's an investigation as having a reasonable explanation to it. But I think you're right. I think it fell in the right lap. I don't think we would have had the book produced if it wasn't yourself that was involved in it. And I just think, thank God you were there, because I generally think that the South Shields Poltergeist, I know some of the bullet points throughout the book of what went on, and possibly this was more active or maybe more sinister than the Enfield Poltergeist, because there was interactions with the family that went, I think, above and beyond what happened to the girls at Enfield.
Yeah, well, you're not the first to have said that. There's some psychical researchers who actually would agree with you. Now, there's been a few times I've mentioned it in posts, or I've mentioned it in like if I'm writing a blurb or if I'm trying to promote the book, I'll say things like, it's one of the most significant cases in the last 50 years, and it sits alongside with Enfield and stuff like that. But I say that, but originally that's not what I actually said. These words have come from other people, other like notable researchers, shall we say? Alan Murdie, who was the head of the Spontaneous Cases Committee for the Society for Psychical Research. Yeah. He gave me the quote about it's being one of the most significant cases in the past 50 years. And I was like, 50 years? 50 years? Wow. And there's another guy who's on the SPR counsel who's told me that he said the same thing. He went, "Oh yes, this sits alongside the Enfield case." And even Guy Playfair, I went to Guy Playfair's house many years ago. We went down with a bit of footage, and we took the manuscript for him. And we were having a look, and we were discussing the case. And we were looking through it and just talking. And he turns around and he says, "Yes, in many respects, this is just, very similar to the Enfield Poltergeist." He says, well, "You're lucky to have experienced this, and you've managed to do a good job in gathering a great deal of data and a great deal of evidence," which I was absolutely thrilled at. So when people do say it's up there with the Enfield Poltergeist, it's nowhere as well known as the Enfield Poltergeist, but when it comes to its ferocity and its intensity, it sits alongside the Enfield Poltergeist case. Obviously, the Enfield Poltergeist is world famous because there was a lot of publicity allowed, and the family eventually they were anonymous at first, but then, well, they were anonymous in Guy's book at first, but then people obviously got to know they were, and they did interviews. Well, with South Shields, the priority is to keep them anonymous because that's what they wished. And
I think that's
in effect,
I think
we've missed out on a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. Because if people wanted to say, well, it could have been manufactured or made up for financial gain, then it makes no sense to stay anonymous. You'd obviously want that notoriety. You'd want to be in books. You'd want to go on to talk shows. You want to talk about your stuff. So I completely agree.
Well, they decided that they were going to be named at first, and then they weren't, and then they were, and then they weren't, and they were undecided. But no disrespect to them. I mean, they were completely mixed up and confused and frightened and bewildered. Eventually, they plumped for anonymity, and they thought, you know what, there's going to be an absolute maelstrom of media if we were to like bring it out into the open with their names as well. And they were frightened of the repercussions, in the aggravation, in the accusations, and so we're completely understand they wanted to go out like anonymous, and we decided, right, well, we'll change the names in the books, we'll make it anonymous, and if there's going to be any aggravation with the media, if there's going to be any aggravation with skeptics, well, we'll take the brunt of it because we're the ones telling the story. We knew there would be. There's been some horrendous criticism and accusations made, but what can you do? It's an extraordinary story, and you can't expect people to believe this sort of stuff happened because objects cannot travel through solid objects, and apparitions cannot be seen, and money cannot just rain from the ceiling out of thin air. And poltergeists are what?
Just like asking some of the items. So, for example, the coins, were they modern day coins? Were the coins that could have been in circulation?
Yes, there were 2 pences and 5 pences and 10 pences.
And again, were they warm to the touch? If you pick them up, did they feel warm?
Yes, they were to a certain extent. Yeah, they were quite warm. We would drive over. The first thing we'd do was take a photograph of them in situ on the floor before we did anything. So sometimes it was sitting there for a few minutes before we'd actually pick them up. So some were warm, some were like not so warm. But unlike the ball, they weren't noticeably warm. We didn't pick up the coins and go, "Ooh, these are hot." We'd pick up the ball and think, "Blimey, this is hot." The coins would think, they're relatively warm.
So that's probably got something to do with the material the ball's made from compared to the coins.
Well, it could be, yeah, or the physics behind the dynamics behind what's actually going on in the first place. What the energy that's creating them to be moved in the first place is that's being considered. And it could be maybe that's why things are hot to the touch when things have been apported or thrown around or stuff like that. But yeah, there was lots of coins. We actually gathered up, and on one day I think we gathered up this huge pile of coins. We've got a photograph of it somewhere. I think there's a photograph in one of the original editions of the book, and there's like a table and there's like a bunch of coins on there. But we never knew exactly where they came from. We know Marianne had this. It was like a porcelain pig, which belonged to, which was for our son Robert, and that was full of 2 pences and coins. And one day that just got smashed, just fell off the cupboard, off the shelf, landed on a chair, and it just and we've got a photograph of this smashed piggy bank with coins everywhere. So we don't know where the coins actually came from. And there was one occasion when Mike got called out in the middle of the night, which was it's fascinating. This I was actually at home in bed on the other side of the Tyne. Mike lived on the south side of the Tyne. I was on the north side of the Tyne. So when the calls come in through the night, they usually went to Mike because he lived just, in the neighbouring borough. And he got a call one night, and he got a taxi down, and I think it was the night that Mark was cut for the first time. He got cut, and he was getting, he was bleeding, and they phoned up frantically, come down, this is happening, blah, blah, blah. So Mike got down there, and they were sitting around the table anyway after it all sort of transpired. He took photographs of these cuts, and he calmed the family down. And Mariana said, hey, listen, well, thanks for coming. Would like to give you something, for your taxi fare, so you're not out of pocket. And Mike obviously refused the money. He said, no thanks. And out of the blue midair, this £10 note, a crumpled £10 note, just materialised and dropped on the table in front of them.
Wow.
Wow, indeed. But I wasn't there. I never saw that. Yeah. I would have cared to have seen that. But I mean, what can you say? I mean, what on earth is going on? I mean, how can these things occur? It's no wonder that a lot of people can retaliate to stuff like this with absolute sheer venom, which they do because it goes against all their worldly beliefs. And some people are maybe just too frightened to believe. Some people think it's just too what's the word?
I know what you mean. Fantastical, that kind of.
Yes, fantastical.
Yeah, it goes above and beyond what we're programmed to believe, and that depends a lot on what TV shows you watch, the people around you, your upbringing. I think that seems to be a trend with a lot of things.
Well, that's it. I mean, Guy Playfair said in his introduction to our book, he actually wrote, "These things do occur. They've been seen to occur. Reality is not what you think it is." Yeah. And I love that quote.
I thought the Guy Playfair book, "This House is Haunted." I mean, I had very small contact with Guy. I sent him a book out. We had a few emails that went forward and backwards. He signed it for me and that. But I was absolutely fascinated that he kind of went in there almost to disprove that there was anything there, and came away basically with one statement: "Well, this house is haunted." So when we look at the similarities, Darren, between things like the South Shields Poltergeist, your case that you were involved in, and when we look at the Enfield Poltergeist, do you find that it's typical of paranormal poltergeist activity to start off small, like we say with Lego blocks and small Meccano set pieces moving around, and then it gradually gets perhaps more stronger, more adventurous, or it's trying to make a point? Is there normally a crescendo of kind of activity?
Yeah, I think it normally works more or less basically the way you've said it. Poltergeists have got this reputation for like following certain patterns. You follow a certain pattern. Obviously, there is exceptions to the rule. However, different poltergeists last for different amount of times. You get some lasting for a year or two, even longer. Majority of them only last a couple of months. So it's a funny situation how they work. But well, simple fact is nobody knows exactly how they work. But they seemingly start off with sort of light, easy, subtle types of phenomena, and then it seems like as they progress, they sort of get into gear, and then they start moving on a bit, and they start getting a little bit more exciting, shall we say, or more frightening, or shall we say, for the family. And nobody knows how they work. Basically, some kind of peter out before they can get to a certain stage. Others seem to like go past that certain stage and then reach on into other further stages, like say, for example, the stage of physically attacking someone, or the attack of, or maybe like starting fires. There's a lot of poltergeist cases where
fires,
the fire starters, and nobody wants to experience one of them. sometimes they peter out in the early days, and nobody knows how it works. But with South Shields and Enfield and some of the other bigger cases, there must have been something at play here which allowed the poltergeist or whatever it is to just keep on going and keep on progressing and keep on developing to a point where it just got absolutely crackers. It was absolutely crackers. Yeah.
You know as well with poltergeists, they seem to be. I can think of a case in America where there was a family, but in particular it was the mother that it had got an issue with. What was he a member of the family or a member of your like crew, the team that you had there, or other people that visited? Was he somebody that it seemed to particularly dislike?
Say that again. Sorry, I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, I'm just saying that normally poltergeist activity will single somebody out to be the main person that they try to get at. And I can remember watching a case once in America where there was the mother. It was particularly, it was venting things at her. So it would pull her at her chair, it would grab her hair. It seemed to be really evil towards one person. Was there a member of the household or yourselves that particularly was vented at by the poltergeist?
Yes, there was. But in this case, unusually, it wasn't a stereotypical teenage or pubescent girl. A lot of poltergeist researchers tie up different poltergeists by saying the focus at this one, the focus at that one, the focus in this case. There's a common characteristic here, and it's like they normally say it's like a teenage pubescent girl. In this case, there wasn't one. The youngest individual in the house was 3 at the time, and Mark and Marianne were in their 20s at that point. So your stereotypical focus was missing from this particular account. There is other cases on record where there isn't the teenage focus. For example, there was a case in Jarrow which we did. There wasn't a focus there, like a teenage one anyway. There was a poltergeist in the 1990s investigated by John and Ann Spencer. That was like they were like a 50 to 60-year-old couple, and they didn't have any children at all, which was quite strange. So not all of them follow the rules, if you know what I mean. Yeah. But as we were progressing and sort of investigating our case, it did become clear that there was a focus per se in our case, and that turned out to be Mark. He was obviously Marianne's other half.
Yeah.
And the stepdad to Robert. And it turned out, well, whether it was him that was the focus, who can say, but it certainly did pay plenty of attention to him, if you know what I mean. Although it did, it's a weird case because it ended up, it focused on the little one for a while because it moved him around, it picked him up, it wrapped him up in blankets, it stuffed him under this chair thing that he was found under a chair after being hidden in a cupboard, which was quite incredible. But after a short while, because this young lad, he identified whatever it was in the house as a playmate of his, and he called it Sammy. And there was a bit of debate at the beginning of the case between Mike Halliwell and I, and about what exactly was going on. Mike was sort of being led down the route that it could be an imaginary childhood friend or some sort of entity that's coming across as a childhood friend, and I was adamant from the outset it was a poltergeist. But obviously later on in the case, it became crystal clear that it was a poltergeist, and it seemed to be focusing in on Mark, as we found out when he started being cut by this thing, and he started getting attacked by it.
I read about scratches, like the normal typical 3 scratches. Is that what he was experiencing?
Yeah, but it was a few more than 3. I think on the first occasion, we mentioned earlier on about the crumpled £10 note after Mike had got called out. Well, if I remember rightly, that night he was called out, it was the night where Mark was being cut for the first time. And he got in a taxi and he went down there. And upon getting to the family house, obviously he was let in, and he calmed the situation down because the two of them were absolutely frantic. And they were basically saying, it's attacked him. And So Mike was getting the details from them, and he was having a look to see, by then that the scratches were kind of disappearing. But it was a little bit later on, he actually he stopped and he was like, well, I'm getting that sensation feeling again. I think it's going to happen again. So Mike had him take his top off, and he was watching him, and these cuts kind of appeared. But on the photographs that he got, and the film footage that he got of it, it wasn't just like 3 scratches here and 3 there. It was just his body was covered, like around the front of his stomach here, his side, up on his chest, on his back, like all around his torso. It was literally. I don't want to sound melodramatic when I say this, but it literally looked like he'd been slashed to pieces. Wow. But I saw the footage that Mike had filmed a day later or so. Unfortunately, I wasn't there again because I was at home on the other side of the water. And Mike had phoned us the following morning, and he said, "You're not gonna believe what's happened." It's just like, what the hell are we dealing with here? He said it's actually attacked him and it's cut him. So I went across to see the footage that Mike had took, and it was quite incredible. But to be honest, the footage is I've got to be honest. Yeah, the footage is quite grainy. It's quite poor, but we did get more footage as the case progressed, because he was cut on 5 different occasions, I do believe it was, and on a number of those occasions there was a lot of other people there, like investigators, who we then invited in, because we basically said, look, this is getting like beyond stupidity. It's going absolutely crackers. We need to get people in and get as much witness testimony as possible. Yeah. So on one of the nights when he was cut, there was around about 8 or 9, maybe 10 were that was stopping over in the house that night, and there was about 4 or 5 video cameras, all trained on him when he was being cut. Now the unfortunate thing is, because he's on the footage, we can't show anybody the footage because it'll compromise his anonymity.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's in a right catch-22 situation. Yeah, there's lots of people wanting to see it, and I'm itching for people to see it, to be honest. But the fact of the matter is, what's our priority here? And the priority is protecting their anonymity. 15 years old. Yeah, that's still under the cloak of the anonymity, and we wanted to stay that way. But it's frustrating for investigators like us who's got this footage, and it's like, well, this is one of the reasons why there was about 3 or 4 filmmakers, documentary makers, and they did actually come and film Mike and I talking about it, and they looked at the footage, and they wanted to put certain footage on the screen. Some of it you can't see his face, other times you can't. Sometimes you can identify a family member in the background and stuff like that. However, I mean, the thought occurs we could actually pixelate their faces out and do stuff like that. But upon talking to it was an SPR archivist. He was the guy who like collects all the stuff and gets the stuff filed away. Yeah, I was talking to him about submitting the footage to the SPR, and he said it more or less had to be submitted as is. But when you submit footage like that to an association like that, it's open for members to view, and they can go and like get it out. And I'm thinking, well, we can't have anybody just going to see it and looking at it because it's going to identify who they are. So it's a bit of a nightmare situation. There was a little bit of footage released. I think it was on the Sun or the Daily Star, not the Daily Star, the Daily Mail, the Daily Mail. They did a huge 2-page spread on the case, and the Sun did as well. And we were expecting a complete hatchet job, to be honest. And we thought they were going to twist everything out of proportion and basically laugh. But both papers did an absolute blinding job of reporting it basically. And for a month or so after the story broke, shall we say, there was a little bit of footage. We've got the bottle balancing on its side. We've got that footage, which was on for a month or so. And there was a bit of cuts footage, but the cuts footage had to be like sort of cropped, and you had to zoom in, and it lost some of its quality. So it took loads of stick for that. But later on, like we're saying, we've got some good quality footage as well. But if 15 years on, I'm still thinking how I can get around having this footage archived and stored away for future generations or for future researchers down the line.
Did you at any point while you were investigating, did you have a moment where you thought, am I safe? You know, did you worry about your safety while you were in the building?
Yeah, we did. And it's funny enough, it wasn't when Mark was being cut. It wasn't during that sort of period. The time where I really started sort of, you know, when you swallow, when you swallow when you're eating, and you're starting to get really scared.
Yeah.
And the time that was when Marianne started getting text messages from the pod, which was incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible. Some of the accounts linked to that. Some of the I'm gobsmacked. I get like this when I talk about it. I get excited about it. I get happy about it, but then I get terrified, and then I get like, wow, did this really happen type thing again. But there was an occasion where it started making use of the telephones in the house and the mobile phones, and it was using those devices to instill fear in this woman. And by God, it was working. And the first instance occurred like we were just sitting in the house, and the normal telephone rang, and when she picked it up and listened, and it said, "You have a voice message." So she pressed the numbers to retrieve the message, and it was just this electronic voice. I mean, back in 2006, when you sent a text message to a landline, it would translate it into this robotic type voice.
Yeah, all right. You mean that.
Read it on. So we'll listen to it, and it just said hi, 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 hi. It was saying like hi 5 or 6 times, and she thought that was strange. So the phone went down, and then another one came through a moment later, and it had something else written on. What was it? I cannot remember what it said. It was something like sorry or something like that. I think it said the word sorry. And at that point, Marianne stood up, because then we'd realised it was starting to send messages and that. She stood up and she told it to bloody go do one, because she was frustrated. And she went, "Will you just leave us alone?" And I think that's when the message came through with "I'm sorry," and I'm sorry written on. But then about 5 minutes later, just as Mark and Marianne were seemingly, they like breathed a sigh of relief. It was like it said sorry, perhaps it's good. Oh, goodness me, this could be it. They actually started thinking to themselves, this could be the end, because it had apologised. And we were thinking, well,
conscience, and he was saying sorry.
Sorry?
They believed it had got a conscience, and it was saying sorry that it had gone too far.
Yes. And just as it got to a point where they were really sort of like kind of dropping their guard that afternoon, another phone call came through, and it said, just, "I'm back," which to me was perfect timing. It gave them a false sense of security, and then boom, it hit them with "I'm back." And then it started coming through on their mobile phones as well. They were getting messages on their mobile phones. So we looked at the mobile phone, and pressed the buttons, and we thought, well, who where's it actually coming from? And we're looking at it was coming from Mark's phone, which we thought, well, that's odd. And we said, "Look, Mark, it's coming from your phone. Are you sending these text messages?" Obviously, from the outset as well, at the beginning of the case, we were always trying to be on the ball, looking for fraud or tricks, having the wool over our eyes and stuff like that. And so it was a case of, well, obviously, the first thing we're going to think of is it's coming from your phone. Is it you? And he went, "No, I promise I'm not sending anything like that. I'm not doing like this." So I said, "Right, everybody, get your phones out on the table and put them down." So we got the landline, we put it down, because it sat in the cradle, you could carry it around the house. We put the phone down on the table. Everybody put their mobiles on the table as well. And we were just sitting around the table having a discussion. And then Marianne's phone just went, it beeped, and she picked it up. It was another text message. And it's like, well, it's come from Mark's phone again. And then we were sitting there, well, Mark's phone's on the table in front of her. So we thought, well, could it be pre-programmed to send a text? You know, because you've got to think of all of these things. You kind of jump like to the conclusion, like it's paranormal straight away. We tried to eliminate other things. So it was interesting that it was sitting on the table in front of her when it sent the message. And then I think it was Mike had the idea. He said, come here, give us the phone. He picked the phone up. He took it apart and took the SIM card out and he took the battery out, like technically rendering it completely dead. Put it down on the table. And no sooner had we sat back, Marianne got another text from a phone that's sitting disabled on the table in front of her. And it was at that point I started thinking to myself, I had a little mobile phone at the time, one of those little square Nokia things. And I didn't have internet on it or anything like that. I just wanted it to text out to receive phone calls and, you know, basic stuff like that. And at that point, I started leaving it at home in case I started getting text messages. I was like, I'm not bringing my phone to this house. But there was other things as well. I mean, there was a time when she'd had enough. I think it was later on in that afternoon. She'd had enough of the poltergeist antics that day, and she thought, right, you know what it is? I'm going to pack a little bag. I'm going to get the boy, and I'm going to stay at my mum's for the night. And so she packed up some gear, and she was on her way to her mum's. And she happened to phone Mike, and she was talking to me. She says, "Look, I'm going to my mum's tonight. If you try and ring us at the house, I'm not going to be there. Blah, 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 blah. But can I just ask you something?" She says, the poltergeist won't follow us, will it? Beep, 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 beep. Text came straight through as she was on the phone. And she opened up the text and she said, "I will come with you. I will follow you." And it was like, "Tonight's the night you will die, you bitch." And it was sending all these nasty text messages. And all the text messages were all based on the conversation that Mike and Marianne were having at that particular time. "I'm scared to go to sleep," she says. It's going to come. Beep, 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 beep. Text came through. "I will come for you tonight when you're asleep, and I will kill you." Along the that's not the exact words it said. Obviously, it's all detailed in the book and stuff, you know. But generally, it was sending death messages and death threats, and we were basically saying, "Look, they're just empty threats. They're just empty threats. It's just trying to ramp you up. It's trying to wind you up. It's trying to generate fear from you. This is what they like to do." You know, that's what we thought at the time. You know, they said, "Guarantee you're going to wake up fine tomorrow morning and everything's going to be tickety-boo." And luckily she did. And
do you think as well? I mean, you mentioned earlier on about the one of the amazing things in this case was it started interacting with the lad, didn't it? The couple's lad, and you're saying that at times it used to hide the child in the house.
I think that happened once or twice. Again, there was one occasion where Meg had received a phone call and Marianne was absolutely frantic. She was beside herself, and she was screaming, It's taken Robert. It's taken Robert. We cannot find him anywhere." So Meg was saying, "Look, just calm down. Start looking in places. Start looking in here. Look under the bed. Look in the bed. Look in all the rooms. Open the door." So she did all that, and she went to this cupboard, and she opened up the cupboard, and there was nothing in there. So she closed it, and then she went looking around in other places. And I mean, it was only moments. It was only a case of he was gone for but for her that would have felt like an eternity.
Oh God, yeah.
And especially because what potentially is taking the child was supernormal or abnormal or something that nobody understands, something potentially evil or malevolent, you know. And anyway, she hurriedly looked around, and then she come back to the same cupboard, opened him up. There he was. This was wrapped up in a like a continental quilt. But on another occasion, he was found stuffed under this little chair. He was wrapped up in a little bundle, and the chair was just placed on top of him. So yeah, it did.
I mean, the chat at the time, the child was he 3 years old at the time?
3 years old, yeah. He was just a little blighter.
And I know he used to talk about him as Sammy.
Yeah.
Did he? I mean, I don't know if you've kept in touch with the family since, but has he got any memory of these things happening? Or
I don't know. After the case finished, it was about a year or so after the case finished, the family had decided that they wanted to be done with all of it and any of it.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, our presence sort of reminded them of this horrendous time in their life. So we respected that. We thought, well, look, good luck, and off you go. And then we obviously went our way and we started like investigating other cases and things like that. But to this day, I don't know where they are or where they went. I hope they're well. I hope they're keeping well.
Yeah.
And I'm fingers crossed. The likelihood is, I mean, who knows? He might remember. I can barely remember things I did when I was 3, but mind you, there was nothing as exciting as a poltergeist in my house when I was 3. So I'm not sure how much he might be able to remember. I'm sure Mark and Marianne will be able to remember quite a lot, obviously.
There was also, you mentioned gravity-defying things that happened with the bottle. Was there some chairs that were stacked up? What other kind of things did you witness?
Well, I never witnessed the bottle balance. That was the night Mike was called out to deal with the cuts for the first time, and I was away. But he filmed the bottle balancing on its side. Personally, I witnessed some incredible stuff. Things being thrown around. I witnessed like the coins raining on with stuff like that, doors slamming, and I witnessed the cuts on the other occasions. There was times where we were just finding things all over the house, just the most stupidest things. Like, say, for example, we went into the toilet. There's a little toilet at the top of the stairs. We went in, you pay a visit, you have a look around. When you go to an investigation like this, you're on constant alert all the time as well. So you're trying extra hard to, like, take notice of where things are. And you must have took about 1,000 photographs every time we went into the house just so we could place where everything is. And if we found anything out of place, we would look at the photograph and say, well, it was like a comparative photograph sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's times we walked in the toilet and I went and paid a visit, and then, half an hour later, went back in. There was a huge Lego block standing upside down, and it was only half filled with water rather than like fully filled. It was why you would turn the Lego block upside down and half fill it with water is anybody's guess, but it did things like that. And then other times you'd go in and there'd be porcelain. There's a porcelain pig, which they used to have on the windowsill, and it was always moved. The toilet seat was put down and the porcelain pig was put on the lavatory seat. And there was loads of other examples of weird phenomena, which was just mind blowing. There was one day we went and we took along this medium. And I think it was like quite earlier on in the investigation, and we took along this other lady medium to maybe perhaps shed a bit of light on the case at the time, just in case, because we're looking at all avenues,
Yeah.
And the 3 were turned up that time, and we went upstairs and we had a little look around, and we discovered this thing that had been set up on the table in the bedroom, and it was a cuddly toy with another cuddly toy. And it was like turned at sort of an angle. So like one cuddly toy was lying on its back and another cuddly toy was like sitting next to it. But it had this, it was like an 8 or 9 inch carving knife. And it was like lying over this cuddly toy's throat. And we were like, oh my goodness, me and Mike, to be honest, thought we were definitely having our legs pulled. So we basically turned around and said, look, this is a bit too much. I mean, Mark and Marianne was like, oh my God. Marianne was like weeping. She was actually crying because she was so terrified, So we got them downstairs, and I'm talking to Mike, and I'm saying, look, we're going to have to say something here. We're going to have to just outright ask. We've mentioned hoaxing before. We're going to have to just ask them again. Are you taking the mickey here? Because this is just ridiculous. And we sat them down. We asked them. Marianne burst out crying again. Mark was like, we're not doing this. We're not, honestly, we know nothing about it. It was the poltergeist. This is terrifying. And obviously it was quite exciting. It was quite thrilling, the whole thing. And basically for the rest of the day, there was a whole litany of other incidences that happened whilst everybody was together. And there were like blatant things, which to us, we got the message loud and clear. And I think the message was, you're blaming him for the stuff that I'm doing here. And there you go. Have this, have that, see this, see that. And it was as if to say, he's not taking credit for my handiwork here. It's, you know, it's as mad as that sounds, it's as if we hacked this thing off by accusing somebody else of setting up its tricks. And it was like, I'll show them. And there was one example, we were all standing downstairs discussing what had been going on. And I looked towards they had these big bay windows when you step out into the yard. And if you come outside and you look straight directly above, you've got Robert's bedroom. And basically what had happened was when we were discussing the poltergeist, I just happened to look up, and just as I looked up, these big Lego blocks, only these ones were blue, I just seen them tumble down past the window and land on the ground outside. And we were like, who threw them? Because there was nobody upstairs. And Marianne ran out and she was like, that's Robert's Lego. We tidied that up and we put that away in the box this morning. No, the box was actually in Robert's room with a lid on it, but the window was closed, the blinds were down, and the curtains were closed as well. The window was locked. So whatever it was came through the box, out into the room, and somehow managed to get outside before it dropped down onto the patio. So that's one of the more interesting things, which when I think about quite a lot, I still scratch my head and I'm still like, wow. There's times on occasion where I've actually questioned it myself. I think everybody has to question it. If they had a poltergeist like this, I'm sure they would be like, did that really happen? Was I mistaken in some way? Could this have been all misattribution? But this is one of the many incidences that I can think back, and I think, no, it wasn't. This thing was real. And I think back and I scratch my head and I'm like, wow, just wow. How the hell could those blocks have got out the window outside and then dropped down?
I think I remember, again, referring back to, because they're very similar cases, Enfield. I think there were certain times when objects, and I think even Janet, one of the girls at one point, I think went through a floor. So what was around about is making something disappear in one area that's locked and making it appear in another area. So almost like teleporting it to another area and allowing it to appear or drop on the floor. And that's why you're explaining now with the blocks that it kind of went out of the box, through a blind, through a closed window and fell outside. And it's like, well, that's just not physically possible. But it was happening to you.
Yeah, and that's why so many people don't believe it occurs. Yeah. But it happens.
Well, did you ever have a moment where you were on your own and something happened that you knew was meant for just you to see, and it was like the first time that you realized the poltergeist had acknowledged you and was saying, now this is just for you, Darren. I'm communicating with just you now.
Yeah. There was one night, it was after one of we had a few stopovers at the house, and we'd stop up quite late and we'd drink tea and we'd have a chat, and we would just generally much about to see what would happen. And there was one occasion where everybody had like left to go home, and I decided to stay over. I think that was the night. It was Dave Wood and Nicky Sewell from ASAP. They had come up that day, and they travelled all the way from Swindon. And at about, I think it was about 1-2 o'clock in the morning, they eventually packed up their stuff and went to the hotel. And I stayed on the settee. And I ended up having a game of sort of psychic tug of war with this poltergeist, because it wouldn't let us go to sleep. Wow, it's crackers. I was lying on the settee and I could feel it pulling the blanket, the quilt that I'd been given, and I remember like looking up and pulling it back on us, and it was being tugged off, and I was literally playing tug of war with this thing, and it was lifting up. So yeah, that's one example, I suppose, where it was just me and it.
Did you think that?
I think one's enough.
Did you ever feel like as though? I mean, I know there's talk. Some people believe that poltergeists are various things. I want to talk about that in a little bit anyway. About what your thoughts poltergeists are. But did you get a feeling that it was an individual, that it was a person or one entity that was messing around with all of you? Was it intelligent? Did it come across to you like he was sending messages, it was moving things, it was playing tug of war with you at night? This was an intelligent entity that was taunting you.
Yeah. We would sort of pretty much come to the conclusion that whatever this particular poltergeist was, again, that there's a few theories of this different. There could be different types of poltergeists. There's one where it could be like the RSPK, which comes from a disturbed sort of adolescent or a child.
Yeah.
Other people think it's an entity as such, and it's come up from the depths of hell. I'm not too sure about that coming, like Satan's minions or whatever. But we were led to the belief that whatever this particular poltergeist was, it did have a sentience of its own. It did have seemed to have personality. It seemed to have intelligence, although quite rudimentary. It was basic intelligence, but it still had intelligence. It left messages here.
Did it seem to have knowledge of things that it couldn't have known, for example?
No, I don't think it did. Again, this is one of the things, if I'm remembering rightly, that we're never actually quizzed it on. There's a couple of things that I would like to have done again. A couple of things that I wish that I'd tried, i.e. communication by knocking. I mean, poltergeists are renowned for tap, 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 knock, knock, that type of thing. Now, there was knocks and raps and bumps recorded and heard, and there was tremendous thumping before we became involved. Bang, 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 bang. It was a rapping poltergeist, but we didn't determine anything of that nature because there was so much to think about, and there was so much to log and so much to get down and try and get everything right, and then simultaneously look after the family. And so there was a few things which I wish we could have done differently, and that was probably one of them. I think, to be honest, to try and establish if it was some sort of, I mean, it did try to communicate in its own way to us, and we did try to leave messages back for it. But in retrospect, I wish I could go back and start knocking and say, give us a knock, give us a sign, give us a knock. Let's hear you thumping, and get the tape recorders going, and let's get some serious raps on tape. Even though we've got a few, just minor little things like that. It wasn't a major knocking thing for us. So,
do you think that the entity itself had a message for anybody, or was it literally just there to cause as much disruption and agony and pain and fear to the family that lived there? Was that it seemed to be its only cause?
I don't think there was any messages for anybody in particular. I don't think it was like a spirit trying to get through. Whatever it was just some unknown malevolent force that seemed hell-bent on creating havoc and misery and destruction, which is a classic poltergeist. That's what they do. And
sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, what I find I've got a striking similarity between the poltergeist and between human nature is both share those qualities. They both share malevolence. They both share being nasty, spite, all that sort of stuff. They're both characteristics that human beings have got, but also the poltergeist have got, which kind of leads me on occasions to think, well, maybe they do come from a human after all. Maybe it's humans' true nature trying to manifest in a way. But you look at other poltergeists and you think, well, each poltergeist can lead you down a different path, and it can lead you to different conclusions. So I think after thousands of years of poltergeists, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of well-attested documented cases, we're still no closer to actually establishing just exactly what it is, where it comes from, what do they want, if they want anything. The debate still rages on today. And the only thing that you can be certain in relation to poltergeists, for me personally, the only thing that I can say with hand on heart is that these things exist. but people still deny that all this stuff goes on. And I think that's a bit of an insult to the victims of poltergeist as well. I've got to be honest. When you're a liar, you're this, you're that, and that. And it's like, I tell you what, just for half the time that they've went through this, or even a quarter of the time, you put up with just some of the stuff that they've had to put up with, and you'll be a crumbling wreck.
Yeah.
We always used to say, just wait till a poltergeist come and picks on you, then you'll know. Then you will know.
Yeah. Was there anybody that ever visited as well? We talked about some of the other groups that came, and the organisations and mediums. Was there anybody that ever came in and perhaps got on the wrong side of the poltergeist and decided to take a particular dislike to him?
No. It was a case of, there was we brought this, everybody who came into the house after our involvement came in under our sort of supervision, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
We had the case from start to finish, and we kind of decided who would come in when things were happening, because we had to keep tight control over the situation. But our boss was Mark and Marianne. We did nothing without their say so. When we wanted other people to come in, we sought their permission first, and if they said no, nobody come in.
Yeah,
they were happy to have Mike and I in, but when time comes for it was like, look, we need to get people in. Can we invite different types of people in? And they were agreeable to that. But before the case started for us, they did have like mediums and a few spiritualists in, and they were they just came for an afternoon, more or less, and they basically said the house was haunted like Grand Central Station. There was ghosts on the stairs. There was 3 in the living room. There was 2 in the dining room. You've got a dog on the stairs. There's an old man on the top floor mooching on the landing. And we can't do anything about it, and they'll just go in their own time. Goodbye. And then they just went. And we thought, well, I know not every spiritualist medium is like that, but come on. They went in to see this terrified family, and I think the family left more terrified after they left. They made no help whatsoever.
Yeah.
But in regards to singling anybody out, none of the visitors that came to the house it singled anybody out. However, it did follow us.
I was going to ask you this. So it did follow people away from the house?
Oh, yes. Well,
tell some of them things then. I'd like to find out about that.
There's, in fact, my next book, the book called Contagion, In the Shadow of the South Shields Poltergeist, was basically started and written after we experienced so much contagion activity from the South Shields case. Now, I'd heard about contagion before in other cases, but not that many people tend to look at it. They sort of like brush over it and focus on the activity that occurs at what we call ground zero, or the primary infestation site. We call that like the ground zero. But when, say for example, Marianne went out for the day with Mark, and then something happened where they were, people would assume that the poltergeist followed them out. In a way it did, but it didn't really follow them out, because if it's person-centered, it's with them anyway. Do you know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
It follow them, it kind of, they took it with them. Does that make sense? What I class as somebody being followed is if somebody like Mike or myself left the house, in which we did on a number of occasions, and we started experiencing funny business in our homes, which did occur to a certain extent. There was one occasion when, after we'd been to the house, the poltergeist had completely trashed the place. We got a message on our way home with a couple of pictures sent on the phone with the bedroom turned upside down, and we said, we've just left that. We've just left the house like less than a minute. We're sitting on the bus going back, and the house was immaculate, and then within seconds it was just turned upside. That happened when Mike was there as well. He looked in the room 1 minute and everything was pristine, tidy, and then they come back 2 seconds later and the whole place was upside down. Now, what fascinates me about this, it was done absolutely silently. You didn't hear crash, bang, wallop, all that sort of stuff. It was done absolutely silently. So it was within 1 minute, you'd look in and everything's in order, but then you just turn away, look back, and everything's upside down. It must have moved in an instant and in total silence.
That's crazy.
The whole thing's crazy. again, this is why a lot of people find it hard to believe, because, I mean, we've been called liars and money makers and absolute mongerers and this, that, and t'other, and we're like, no, honestly, we're telling the truth. We're telling the truth. This occurred. This occurred, and I was arguing until I was blue in the face, but eventually now I've just given up. I've given up as a bad job. When people are like nasty and they just say, you know, Jack and Ori, whatever, I'm just not interested. But in relation to going back to Mike's, we got on the bus and we went back to Mike's, and we went into his office and we sat doing, there was a couple of chairs, and got his computer on, and we're talking about the case, and we're starting typing up our notes and things like that. And we'd been sitting in the office for a while, and we thought, right, it's time for a cup of tea and a smoke outside. So we stood up and we walked out of this little narrow passageway. And on the sort of right-hand side on the way out, they had this bookshelf. Now, on this bookshelf, there was a big, weighty tome. It must weigh about 4 or 5 pounds. Big, huge, heavy hardback. And it's called The Borough of South Tyneside. Or was it The Borough of South Shields? One or the other. It matters not.
Yeah.
I can't quite remember. Anyway, it was a big, fat hardback book based on the history of South Tyneside or South Shields. And funnily enough, we're actually talking about what potentially might have been on the house prior to the house being built there. So we were actually looking into that at the time. And as we walked past this bookshelf to go and make a cup of tea, we cleared the actual bookshelf, and we heard this tremendous thud behind it. And when we turned around and looked, the Borough of South Tyneside, which had been lying flat on the bookshelf, was like lying on the floor behind me. And we actually turned around, and I said to Mike, do you think we've brought the poltergeist back with we? And he went, I hope not, because Jackie would kill us, and Jack is his wife.
Yeah, okay.
So we were laughing about it, but we paid little no attention of it at the time. But then other things started occurring, you know, in other places. Other investigators took stuff home with them, and that's all detailed in the book, the Contagion book, which we've wrote. But we've looked at other poltergeist cases, and we've actually discovered some absolutely striking, superb parallels between other cases. Like, I mean, absolutely mind-blowingly similar things occurring. Like the bottle balance that we had at South Shields, where the bottle was balancing on its edge. Another case we investigated with no prompting from us whatsoever. One of the girls turned around and said, oh, yes, Rosie walked into my bedroom one time, and she was absolutely astonished to see this bottle of water standing on its edge. And you could have knocked me both down with a feather. And we said, well, I mean, what a parallel is that? So we started looking at all these parallels and all these spooky coincidences, and the whole book's based on parallels and contagion. And I'm actually updating that at the moment as we speak. And okay. I'm hoping to get that republished, because it was published in 2014 at first, and that is an interesting book in itself, to be honest. It's caused a bit of controversy, not nastily controversy. It's some researchers are like open to the idea, and they think it's quite an interesting idea. One researcher particularly thinks it's the first notion in relation to the poltergeist nature that's been sort of put forward for a long, long time. So there's a few quite excited about it, because we're suggesting, we've put the idea forward. I've got to make this perfectly clear. It's just a theory what we're putting forward. It's an idea based on the aftermath of the South Shields poltergeist. We've come to the conclusion that the poltergeist nature could, yeah. I'm just have to specify that again. There could just be one. We've called it an arc poltergeist. So there's one parent body, and it's just got like arms which reach out and infect other places. So like one poltergeist is every poltergeist, if you know what I mean. It's kind of hard to put into words at the minute.
Yeah.
But I
suppose by definition, though, looking at it that way, a poltergeist, for example, wasn't in the premises prior to it becoming haunted, and then it appeared there. So there's no reason why a poltergeist can't reach out, branch out, or even move from building to building. There's no rule book, is it, that says that can't be the facts?
No, there's not. And there's not that many people who's actually like looked into the contagion aspect of it. in relation to, like, I mean, I've been looking through various journals trying to find accounts of stuff like that, and I've read loads of books lately, and I'm all trying, you know, for the update of the book, because the first version of the book, really, in retrospect, we should have put a chapter in on other cases that have experienced contagion, but we didn't. So I'm rectifying that this time round. So what I've done is I've been out and I've found a whole bunch of cases from Australia, from America, from the United Kingdom, from all over the place, where people have reported, and then the poltergeist followed the investigators home, or the poltergeist went home with such and such. And as long as the poltergeist went home with somebody else that didn't live at ground zero, that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
If the poltergeist went with the people that lived at ground zero to work with them and then erupted at work, I don't class that as being followed, because you live with a poltergeist. It's part of them, if indeed poltergeist is coming from within the human focus. However, it could get interesting if the poltergeist is an entity of some sort, and it erupts in the house, and then if it does follow them, then there's just so many questions. So many.
Yeah, I suppose what you're saying there. I mean, I spoke to a chap on one of the other podcasts, Father Jason Bray. He's an Anglican priest that does exorcisms. They call them deliverance services now. And he was saying that they are trained to do exorcisms, believing in 3 different kinds of topics to do with the paranormal. So one is real hauntings, where there's a spirit that can be seen, interacting. You know, he knows you're there, you know it's there, they communicate with you. Then there was kind of the tape theory, where things are just living through and recycling in time. So a man sits in a corner in a pub. He's been coming there for 50 years, so you keep seeing him sat in the corner because he's recording into that. Strangely, poltergeists, he believes, and he's taught this way, that poltergeists are human produced. So like telekinesis, it's somebody creates that with the mind. But what you're talking about with contagion, that kind of blows that theory out of the water, because if you've got Mark and Mariana that live together, and let's take the theory of the church that perhaps one of them's creating it, or both of them are creating it with their energy, then if contagion, for example, is yourself going back to a house and experiencing something, you can't have adopted their telekinesis, if you see what I'm saying. It's an entity, for want of a better phrase, a living entity that's decided to attach itself to you and present itself in a different location away from ground zero, which, like I say, is amazing.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
You've in a nutshell, you've basically summed that up. There's nothing for me to say. You've basically said it. It's a mind-blowing concept, but it does happen, and there is cases where it has been documented. But it kinds of, you see, you've got the number of theories of what a poltergeist is. You've got the RSPK, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, which was coined by William Rolle in 1958. 1958. I was just told the other day that poltergeists aren't real because they're a byproduct of reality TV. This is what one skeptic said to me, and I was like, block. Yeah. I just had no time for them whatsoever. And these people are out there. These crackpots are out there. Anyway, this guy, 1958, he comes up with this sort of thing. But never mind 1958, poltergeist, activity dates back to the 1800s, the 1500s, the 1600s. There's cases out there. Yeah. And these things do happen. So in the 50s, this guy come up with RSPK, which was thought like an extension of the psyche, or an extension of the human mind. In effect, it's a temper, like a psychic temper tantrum. That's what I sometimes refer to it as, where the energy bottles up within someone, and then it gets externalized in the form of what's called RSPK. Things start flying around and doors start slamming. It's like me having a temper tantrum. Normally, I would just punch something, or punch the wall, or kick the wall, or I'd go and vent my anger in the gym. They reckon some people aren't capable of doing things like that for whatever reason. It's not their nature to like voice things out aloud and get things off their chest, so they bottle it up. And it's a fascinating theory. But there's, obviously you've got the other theory that it's a discarnate entity, some type of ghost coming back to wreak vengeance, or to, like a ghost that's angry that it's dead, so it's having throwing a wobbler. Enfield Poltergeist case, there was it sort of lent towards that with that Bill Wilkins who died in the corner with a hemorrhage, and he was buried at the local churchyard. And if that was coming from Janet would then have to know that there was a guy called Bill Wilkins living in the house, and he died in the chair in the corner, and he was buried in the churchyard along the road. But she didn't know that. So
yeah,
where did that information come from? It's fascinating, you know. Yeah. But then you've got the theory where, again, I think it was either D. Scott Rogo, he was an American psychical researcher, or it was William Roll. It was one of the two that came up with the notion that perhaps it starts off as RSPK within a disturbed adolescent, and then it develops, and in the early stages, it hasn't sort of like grew to its full potential, and that's why only minor things occur. That's what they're saying, like a movement here or a door closing. But as the case progresses, they start to get more intellectual, they start to get more conniving, cunning, planning. They start doing things, communicating, stuff like that. And he says,
stronger.
Sorry?
They get stronger.
Yeah, they get stronger and they get more clever, as if they're developing. So we're talking about type 1 poltergeist and type 2 poltergeist, which they've been labelled as. But one researcher said there's two types, there's type 1 and a type 2. But I'm maybe thinking about perhaps type 1 just evolves into a type 2. And the theory is, rather than being two types of poltergeist, maybe it's just the one. It's just, you know, like this. You could say there's two types of human beings. There's a child and then there's an adult. They're two types. But it's not really. It's just the child then develops into the adult.
That's true.
And maybe it's perhaps just the type 1 poltergeist evolves into type 2. But what's been postulated is the fact that once this poltergeist sort of develops all of its feelings, in its sentience, and it's got intelligence, when the time's right, now this is a scary thought, it can detach itself from its host from whence it was born, and then becomes a single isolated sentient free spirit, if you know what I mean, to wreak havoc. I know that sounds crackers, but if people are sitting back laughing at this as we speak, I suggest they read the likes of William Rowe, D. Scott Rogo, Nanda Fedor, read their books. And I mean, these guys were like scientists, PhDs, they were academic, clever people. And they spent a lot of time researching, going from case to case to case, documenting the evidence, and how very critical they are of their own work speaks volumes. And if people were to just read them early works, they will see that the poltergeist dates back a lot more than 20 years. You know, like there's the odd idiot out there who suggests these things. They go back years and years and years, and there's been a lot of work and a lot of academic research put into these parapsychological mysteries, psychic disturbances, and for people to just poo-poo them outright just because it A, doesn't fit with their worldview, or B, they're too frightened to admit that it could be real. Or some people are tremendously skeptic because skeptic's a good thing. You've got to be skeptic to a certain extent, but that's it, to a certain extent. People are over-skeptical nowadays, and rather than people going in to establish the fact that something's going on, they're now going into their key motive now is to, right, I'm going to go in and debunk this case, whatever it takes. Yeah, they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater in some cases. There's a lot of stuff, and it's an absolute headache, poltergeist research, I have to say, but it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah,
I love it.
I agree with you. I think the topics of poltergeist in general are fascinating. I'll still stand by probably the most terrifying of all paranormal activity has got to be the poltergeist. The fact that we can't see the perpetrator. You know, if it's a ghost, then people say, you know, we saw a ghost of a lady on the stairs. So you know what you're going to expect. How many people have seen that? When there's a poltergeist in an area, it's a very scary feeling. I suppose it's like swimming in open water and not knowing what's below you or what point you're going to have your leg pulled. You know, it's that kind of feeling of never knowing when you're safe, when you're not safe. Just briefly as well, on You know, when you said, I think that Marianne had said in the past, and I think Mark might have mentioned it, this feeling of they knew something was going to happen. Did they ever describe like the usual static feeling that people sometimes explain, like the static electricity feeling and the hairs all stand up on end and they know something's about to happen?
No, I don't think they did. I think the only thing that they foreseen coming was when Mark was going to get cut. And he had this sensation, his body started to feel hot. And I think that's probably the only sort of time or the only type of phenomena that they could have foreseen coming, because it was like, I guess it was related to him directly, physically. But having said that, people could argue that the cuts were psychosomatic. There could have been some sort of condition that he might have had. But we did consult a medical person afterwards, and we showed them the photographs, and it was a case of like, well, only hours after these cuts occurred, he was completely healed, and they were like, well, no, that can't happen. If you actually cut yourself, if I had, if I was to like scratch myself to pieces, then I'm scratched for a week. Yeah, and it takes up to a week or so for the scratches to completely heal. Whereas these, they were like literally non-existent by the next morning. They were gone. So the paranormally disappeared as paranormally as they came, shall we say, for want of a better word. So the actual appearance of the scratches were just as mystifying as the disappearance of the scratches as well, which was weird.
And obviously, I take it that the investigation itself, as enthralling, as exciting as it was for you, took up a lot of your time. How I mean, the detail in the book itself speaks volumes on that. But how long were you involved in the actual case from? Were you there right at the beginning? Were you there right until the end? Did you see it all the way through?
From my involvement, we saw it right the way through to the end, and we were in touch with the family for a couple of years after, until they decided they wanted to move on. But the case started in December 2005, and I was told about it in June 2006. So when I first started communicating with Marianne about this, I was thinking, well, to be honest, it's actually been going for about 5 or 6 months now, and it was just starting to get warmed up. But we didn't know that at the time, and I was trying to reassure her by saying things like, well, these things are relatively short-lived. 9 times out of 10, these are relatively short-lived. It should be petering out any time now. It should have reached its peak, and it should be gone, because you're lucky to get a poltergeist for 4 to 6 weeks, or 8 weeks if you're really lucky. But there is exceptions to the rule that some go on for months, and in extreme cases, it can go on for years. I think I've been extremely lucky. Mark and Marianne, Robert, bless their cottons, were extremely unlucky. Yeah. But we had one which, from start to finish, lasted more or less 12 months. But we were in from I was communicating from the June until the November of 2006. So I was involved June, July, August, September, about 5 or 6 months. I was involved in total. We made, like, obviously many, many visits to the house and many phone calls, and it was a tiring time, I've got to say. I mean, never mind for us, and May got called out the house quite a lot, bless him. And but for them, that 11 to 12 months must have seemed an absolute lifetime, because even we at points, we were looking at each other, me and Mike, and we were just thinking, when is this thing going to end? When is this ever going to stop?
Do you know, if we look at the case and the way that we describe this energy, how it can be an individual or an intelligent entity, and obviously all the activity kind of stopped in the premises. Is there still a thought then that entity that still exists somewhere, that's still out there in the ether, that could be looking for a new location to get? Do you think it just moved on of its own accord?
You know what? That's a weird question, and it's a good one, actually. And I've actually been thinking about it myself, and I've got no idea. Where do they go? Whence they go? Is it a case of go to the RSPK theory or the human agent theory? Is it because when they've come to terms with whatever problem it is that's kick-started it, it fades away, and it just fades away into non-existence, perhaps, because they generated it, so then they have technically degenerated it. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Degenerate. I know a few degenerates.
Yeah. Or perhaps, like you said about how we have the two different sorts of poltergeist, perhaps poltergeists just have a shorter life expectancy, as it would be, than anything else that we're aware of. So it's a child, becomes an adult, and then it just dies, it burns out. I mean, obviously, if we're looking at that being an actual entity, but as we were talking, I was thinking, where is it now then? As that obviously you just mentioned this, crossed your mind, but it's worth thinking about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I may bring it up in the update of my Contagion book. Where are they now?
I'm definitely going to get that one, by the way, as well, because that sounds like fascinating reading, and I just need to soak up everything that you've got to offer, because you've lived. I mean, obviously, you've lived a fascinating life up until now. By the way, do we know the family? Are they still living in the same location? Are they still in the house? I know you haven't spoken to them for a while, but last time you spoke to them, were they still living in the house?
The last time we spoke to them, they were still living in the house, yes. And that would have been around about 2008.
Okay.
It was more or less at the same time when the book came out. They had decided, like, the book's coming out, here comes the publicity. They just do it, basically. Yeah. And we said, well, we'll handle all the stick and the aggro and whatever that goes with it. We even said, look, that potentially you could do a documentary, you could do this and that. But we laid it out for them. We said it could lead to this, it could lead to that. It might lead to some aggravation and stick. You might, and they just said, no, we want to avoid it. Right? Yeah. We've had this thing in our life for so long. We're pleased to have it gone. It's finished. It's done and dusted. We just want to get. And to this day, they could still be there, but I'm not 100% certain. I've got to be honest.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, just on that side of things, I think you've done an absolutely stellar job on protecting the family. There's some people out there. There's some people out there, I think, that wouldn't have cared as much as you have, and you've been, like I say, you've done an amazing job to keep them out of the limelight. You've been very respectful, which that goes a long way with anything. I think you're extremely lucky from one investigator to another. I think you're extremely lucky to land such a fantastic. Again, not for the family, I understand that. But as an investigator, I think you're the right person to be there, because you were able to collect the information, also record it for other people like myself and other investigators and people fascinated with the paranormal, to be able to be part of that experience, if that makes sense. By reading your book, we're almost in that investigation with you. We see everything that's going on, and so we can kind of link up with that. We understand where you're coming from, but it's I can't wait to get it, sit down with a coffee or hot chocolate if it's later on at night, and get through it. Really looking forward to reading other stuff that you've got. Is there something else coming up? Are you looking for your next big investigation?
I'm always got my ear to the ground and my eyes open, and there's been a few. Like I say, there was a few post South Shields where we had a few cases here, there, and we had a number of them which are detailed in the Contagion book. Not as big as South Shields, but just as interesting. And there was some striking similarities, and we've come up with some interesting ideas. But I have to stress they're just ideas, nothing set in stone. We're not claiming to have all the answers. It's just an idea that I'd like to be taken forward, and have the clever people come along, and then they can maybe do something with it, if you know what I mean. The real scientists or the real academics, they can come along, and they can either poo-poo it, or they can enjoy it, or they can like it, or they can say, well, that's interesting. I don't think about this. It just wanted to create a little bit of topic, a little bit of conversation, create debate, shall we say.
I think it's always healthy to have it. I mean, there's an old saying that I like, which is, I'd rather a mind open by wonder than one closed by belief. And I think that's kind of true. If you can keep your mind open. I mean, I always say that I'll invite guests on, come and talk to me about wherever it may be, like I say, whether it's poltergeist or it's Bigfoot or it's Pizzagate or it's, the soul experiment, wherever it is people want to talk about. And I'll happily sit there and allow somebody to convince me that, I might not believe in Bigfoot, for example, convince me he's real. And if you convince me, I'll be like, do you know what? You've got me then. I'm open, and I think it's a healthy way to kind of live with an open mind.
Yeah, definitely.
So if anybody wants to contact you, are they free to contact you? Is there somewhere they can go to?
Just Facebook.
Get onto
That's it.
Facebook,
Instagram. And I haven't got a website. I'm believe it or not, I'm a bit of a shy private person. So I don't hunt down loads of media type stuff. You know what I mean? I haven't got a big website. Look at me. There was a website originally for the case and book, but that was all Mike Halliwell's sort of business. He was I wouldn't know where to start building a website, to be honest, anyway. But I think you can get us. I mean, if somebody wants to contact me, there's contact details in the South Shields Poltergeist book.
Yeah, and we can add them as well. We can add them as comments at the bottom of the podcast. We can get that put in there for you.
In order to be the email address, they'll have to buy the book.
There you go. They could do that. And well, of course, where can people buy the book then? So is it on Amazon, Waterstones, all good bookstores?
It is, yes. I feel guilty saying that now. I'll just say it's Darren W Ritson 16 at gmail.com. That's my email address. If anybody, you don't have to buy the book to get my email address, or they can get us on Facebook. But the book is available. Most people buy it from Amazon. I should think, what with all this coronavirus business.
Yeah, I got mine from Amazon. And it's like I say, I can't wait to sit down and read it. There's also, I noticed there's some images inside the book, so there's something to reflect on.
You can get it on Waterstones as well. Waterstones website, Amazon, W.H. Smith's, any good book. You can even get it from the History Press website as well.
Okay.
If there's any shops open, good bookshops like Waterstones, W.H. Smith, places like that. But majority of people buy it online, so yes, please do. I just want the story to be told, and I just want the story to be remembered when I'm long gone. That's ideally, and I just want to make a small difference in documenting poltergeist and psychical research. That's all I want from my book sales.
Well, I think you were the right man in the right place at the right time, and it fell into the right hands. This story did. So thank you so much for being that person for us all. And whether we come across another South Shields or Enfield in the future, we'd love to have you come back on the podcast and talk to us again at some point. But until then, Darren, just want to thank you so much again for your time. You've been a fantastic guest, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
All right, thank you very much, Darren. Cheers, mate.
Bye.
Bye.